Hey everyone! Have you heard something about auditory processing disorder and it doesn't quite make sense yet? You are not alone. Stick around and we'll explore the basics. This is Dr. Carol Maynard, pediatric and educational audiologist from Mersey Oates Hearing, Hearing Help for Listening and Learning. And in this video, we're going to learn what is meant by central auditory processing disorder. At the end of the video, I will present a basic plan to help kids with CAPD. If you find this information to be helpful, please hit the like button. Auditory processing disorder, or central auditory processing disorder, is caused by the incomplete or faulty processing occurring in one or more areas of the auditory pathway. The auditory pathway is usually considered to be the neural structures or nerves that transmit auditory information up and into the auditory areas of the brain. Both the American Speech Language and Hearing Association and the American Academy of Audiology have definitions of CAPD. Rather than read those verbatim to you, I have included that in the description below. Suffice it to say that processing of sounds at different places in the auditory system is responsible for the following: sound localization and lateralization, so think finding a sound and knowing where you are in space. Auditory discrimination, think telling small differences between sounds like cat versus cap. Auditory pattern recognition, think sequencing sounds and seeing the pattern of how sounds come in. Temporal aspects of audition, think how long a sound is or how fast sounds come in. Auditory performance with competing acoustic signals, think listening and noise. And auditory performance with degraded acoustic signals, so think listening underwater. We need to be able to do all these things quickly and accurately in order to be able to make efficient use of what we hear. The person speaking in a normal voice typically gives us lots of extra information to make it easier for us to use our hearing, like extra loudness, a full range of pitches, slower speech than we typically require. But a CAPD reduces that redundancy because it takes away a person's ability to use all those cues. Here you see a simple diagram of what areas of the auditory system we're typically assessing when we are performing an evaluation of the central auditory system, as well as the processes which are generally affected by a deficit in that particular area. First, we must determine hearing status, which will dictate how to proceed with the evaluation. The next area evaluated is the lower brain stem, which typically affects the ability to find a sound and to know which ear the sound is coming from. The next area of processing, which we can assess through the tests we have available, is the primary auditory cortex, where sound identification occurs, affecting discriminating and decoding sounds, primarily on the left side of the brain. The right primary auditory cortex is felt to identify sequences and patterns of the sounds coming in. All this information is put together by the large band of fibers which connects the two sides of the brain called the corpus callosum. It's important to remember that we're continually learning about the brain. We know that there are myriad connections throughout the brain. The information I present here is very basic and may change as we learn more about the auditory system. Even though we look at how the sounds coming in are processed, or how the sounds are processed from the bottom up, there are other higher level functions constantly going on in the brain that affect a person's ability to use their auditory system effectively, which are top-down processes. The higher level neurocognitive processes, which relate to but are not considered in the definition of CAPD, are language, its understanding and production, working memory, calculation and problem solving, episodic memory, which is remembering, attention, executive function, which may be planning and strategy and organization, and psychomotor speed. So if you look at it from the other side, you can see that these top-down processes can affect our ability to use auditory information. A problem processing auditory information can affect language, memory, attention, executive function, and processing speed. All those little connections between different parts of the brain make a big difference. Hopefully you can see how complicated things are, but primarily how interconnected everything is. You might see a language difficulty in someone who has a CAPD, or it might really be due to a language processing difficulty which happens in a different part of the brain. Or slow processing speed seen on a psychoeducational evaluation might be due to a CAPD or maybe an ADHD. It's wonderful that we now have many tools to help remediate a CAPD, but if we address what we suspect to be a CAPD without really knowing, we may be working on a symptom of another problem and wasting time that could have been spent on addressing that deficit. If we can identify specific areas of the brain where a CAPD is focused, we can then address strengthening that particular area. Assessing the auditory system is not easy and requires specific equipment, tests, and expertise that can help to reduce the impact of those higher level processes like memory and language, etc. The following are some suggestions if you suspect a central auditory processing disorder. First, find an audiologist who is experienced in assessing and treating CAPD. Secondly, once assessment is complete, treatment should initially focus on the specific area of the auditory system identified as deficient, and recommendations should be deficit specific. And thirdly, treatment should include 3 arms. Strengthening of the auditory system through auditory training and other therapies if appropriate. Implementation of accommodations and modifications to facilitate listening and learning. And development of self-advocacy, including understanding of CAPD, awareness of possible challenges, and ways to address and repair communication breakdowns. Hopefully you've gotten some helpful information today. Please feel free to comment below if you have questions, observations, or suggestions for new topics to explore. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like updates on new videos. And remember, we hear with our brains, not just our ears. This is Dr. Carol Maynard from Mersey Dotes Hearing. Be well and see you next time.